Welcome to the Truth in Crime Case Files. Victor Sandoval sat at the head of the dining table, his polished demeanor hiding the deep undercurrents of guilt and betrayal running through him. He was a man who had built his life around appearances. A successful financial advisor, married to Samantha Hudson, he lived in a spacious suburban home that screamed prosperity. On the outside, Victor had it all: a thriving career, a devoted wife, and a home filled with luxury. But there was a secret lurking beneath this glossy surface, a secret that threatened to destroy everything he had so carefully constructed. Victor's life had taken a dark turn 2 years ago when his relationship with Samantha's mother, Marlene Hudson, had crossed an unthinkable boundary. At first, their relationship had been innocent, or so he told himself. Marlene was always around, offering support during Samantha's busy schedule as an event planner. Victor found comfort in her presence. She was older, wiser, and seemed to understand him in ways that Samantha did not. Marlene, 58, had been the matriarch of her family for as long as Victor could remember. She had always been a nurturing yet firm figure. Retired from her career as a high school teacher, Marlene appeared to be the kind of woman who held her family together with poise and grace. But underneath that facade was a woman who longed for more attention, more passion, more validation. Victor provided that. It started with casual flirtation. Marlene would compliment Victor in ways that felt both maternal and flirtatious, a confusing combination that he initially brushed off. But then came the late-night conversations, the lingering touches, and the moments when Victor found himself drawn to her. He had no intention of betraying Samantha, but Marlene made him feel seen in ways his wife didn't. She filled a void in his life that he hadn't even realized was there. Their affair escalated quickly, a secret shared between them like a poison, slowly eating away at their consciences. Marlene was relentless in her desire for Victor. She wasn't just in it for passion, she was manipulative, possessive. She knew exactly how to play on Victor's insecurities, his worries about aging, his fear of not being enough for his wife. The thrill of their forbidden relationship soon turned into something darker, something far more dangerous. As Victor sat there at the dinner table, Samantha's laughter from the kitchen pierced through the silence in his mind. His wife had no idea what was going on behind her back. To her, their marriage was solid, even happy. She was often too busy planning extravagant weddings and corporate events to notice the subtle shifts in Victor's behavior, the long nights spent away from home, the late-night text messages that made him tense whenever her eyes wandered near his phone. Samantha was nothing like her mother. Where Marlene was calculating and controlling, Samantha was open and carefree, trusting to a fault. Victor had met Samantha 8 years ago at a fundraiser for a nonprofit organization. She had been everything he had wanted at the time: young, vibrant, and full of life. Their whirlwind romance had quickly led to marriage, and for a time Victor believed he had found his perfect match. But over the years, as Samantha threw herself into her career, Victor found himself feeling more like a shadow in her life than her partner. Marlene noticed this, and she used it to her advantage. She would make snide comments about how Samantha didn't appreciate him, how she was too wrapped up in her work to see what a good man she had. Victor, already feeling invisible, began to believe her. The affair became his escape, his way of reclaiming a sense of control in his life. He didn't love Marlene, but she filled a void that had grown too large to ignore. Victor's phone buzzed on the table, breaking him out of his thoughts. It was a message from Marlene. "We need to talk. Tonight." His stomach churned. They had talked just a few days ago, but the conversation had gone nowhere good. Marlene had been getting more demanding, more erratic. She had even suggested that they leave Samantha and start a new life together. The thought alone had made Victor's blood run cold. He didn't want that. He didn't want to destroy his marriage, his career, his entire life over an affair that had spiraled out of control. But Marlene wasn't going to let him go that easily. As he stood from the table, Samantha walked into the room, wiping her hands on a towel, her bright smile aimed directly at him. "Dinner's almost ready," she said cheerfully. "Can you grab the wine from the cellar?" Victor forced a smile, nodding as he walked past her, his mind still racing. He needed to end things with Marlene before it was too late. But how? She had already threatened to tell Samantha if he tried to cut her off. The affair had reached a point of no return, and Victor knew that one wrong move could destroy everything. Later that night, as he sat in his car outside Marlene's house, his heart pounded in his chest. He needed to end it, to tell her that it was over. But the moment she opened the door and he saw the look in her eyes, he knew that ending things with Marlene wouldn't be that simple. She had plans that would shatter their world forever. The sun had barely begun to rise when Isabel Hudson pulled into her sister's driveway. It was early, but Samantha had insisted they head out for their weekend trip by dawn. It had been Samantha's idea, some much-needed sister bonding, she'd said. Isabel was more than happy to oblige. She adored her older sister, despite the growing distance between them in recent years. Samantha had become so engrossed in her event-planning business that their once-tight bond had loosened. This trip was supposed to be their chance to reconnect. Isabel knocked on the door, but there was no answer. Frowning, she rang the doorbell. Still nothing. Maybe Samantha was running late, Isabel thought, shaking her head with a smile. She was always juggling 1,000 things at once. After a few more minutes of waiting, Isabel tried the door. It swung open easily, and an unsettling feeling crept over her. Samantha never left the door unlocked. "Samantha," Isabel called, stepping into the foyer. Silence greeted her. The house was eerily quiet, as if the life had been sucked out of it. "Samantha, are you here?" Isabel moved further inside, her footsteps echoing in the large, empty space. The house felt cold, unnatural. A few steps more, and she noticed the mess in the living room: magazines scattered, a coffee cup knocked over, and Samantha's purse lying on the floor. It was strange, but Isabel brushed it off as one of her sister's typical mornings of chaos. Maybe she had rushed off to grab something from the car and left the door open. But then she saw it, the trail of something dark leading up the stairs. Her stomach twisted as she realized it wasn't a spill or a smudge. It was blood. Her pulse quickened, and panic set in as she raced up the stairs. Isabel reached the top of the stairs and paused, frozen by the sight in front of her. The door to the master bedroom was slightly ajar. A crimson handprint was smeared on the doorframe. She felt as though she were walking in slow motion as she approached, her heart pounding so loudly she could barely hear her own breathing. She pushed the door open, and there on the bed was her sister. Samantha's body was sprawled across the mattress, covered in a bedsheet that was soaked in blood. The sight was grotesque, her lifeless eyes wide open, staring blankly at the ceiling. A deep bruise circled her neck, and there were signs of a struggle. Her arms had fresh scratches, her hands gripping at the sheets as if in a desperate fight for her life. "No!" Isabel screamed, her voice cracking as she fell to her knees beside the bed. Her mind raced, unable to comprehend what she was seeing. She reached out, trembling, to touch her sister's hand, but the coldness of her skin made her recoil. Isabel grabbed her phone, her hands shaking so violently that she could barely dial 911. "Help, please," she sobbed into the phone, barely able to form words. "My sister, she's been killed. She's dead." The dispatcher's voice was calm, instructing her to stay on the line and to step outside the house until officers arrived. But Isabel couldn't move. She was rooted to the spot, staring at Samantha, her mind swirling with disbelief and horror. How could this have happened? Who would do this? Within minutes, the sound of police sirens filled the neighborhood. Officers arrived, their boots heavy as they made their way up the stairs, gently guiding Isabel out of the room. She was in shock, tears streaming down her face as she stumbled onto the front lawn. Detective Marcus Alvarez arrived shortly after, his expression hard as he assessed the scene. With years of experience, he had seen his share of grisly murders, but this one felt different. The brutality of the crime, the intimacy of the attack, it pointed to someone close to the victim. As the forensic team worked in the bedroom, Detective Alvarez began his initial investigation. It was clear to him that this wasn't a random break-in. The lack of forced entry, the manner of death, it all suggested that Samantha had known her killer. Outside, Isabel sat on the curb, wrapped in a blanket provided by a paramedic, her eyes glassy as she stared at the ground. Detective Alvarez approached her carefully, speaking in a calm, measured tone. "Isabel, I'm Detective Marcus Alvarez. I know this is an incredibly difficult time, but I need to ask you a few questions. Can you tell me what happened when you arrived?" Isabel wiped her tears and nodded, recounting her steps from the moment she had arrived. Her voice was shaky, but she managed to give the details of the grim discovery. Alvarez took notes, his mind already piecing together the start of a much larger puzzle. As the crime scene tape was strung up around the property and the forensics team continued their work, the weight of the tragedy settled over the house. Samantha Hudson Sandoval was dead, brutally murdered in the place she had once called home. And somewhere her killer was still out there. Detective Marcus Alvarez paced the floor of the Hudson Sandoval home, surveying the scene with practiced eyes. He had seen many crime scenes in his 15 years on the force, but something about this one felt more personal, more deliberate. The way Samantha had been killed suggested a deep-seated rage, a fury directed specifically at her. And if his gut instinct was right, the answer to who had done this was closer than anyone might think. As the forensics team continued their work, gathering samples of blood, fibers, and anything that could offer a clue, Detective Alvarez knew the real investigation was only beginning. The blood trail leading up the stairs, the signs of a struggle in the bedroom, everything suggested Samantha had known her attacker. There was no forced entry, no indication of a robbery. Whoever had done this had walked right through the door. By late afternoon, the house was still buzzing with activity when Victor Sandoval pulled up in his car, visibly shaken. He had been away on business for the past 2 days and had rushed home after receiving a call from Isabel, who had been too distraught to explain the details. The sight of police cars, flashing lights, and yellow tape around his home made Victor's heart drop. What happened? Victor demanded as he ran toward the house. His face was pale, eyes wide with panic. Detective Alvarez approached him, his expression calm but firm. "Mr. Sandoval, I'm Detective Alvarez. I'm afraid I have some bad news. Your wife, Samantha, she's been killed." Victor staggered back, his hands clutching his head in disbelief. No, this can't be happening." His voice cracked as he collapsed onto the front steps, his breath coming in shallow gasps. "Who did this? Why?" Alvarez studied Victor carefully. It wasn't uncommon for spouses to react this way, but the detective knew better than to jump to conclusions. Still, Victor's reaction would be important to observe. "We're doing everything we can to find out, Mr. Sandoval. But I need to ask you a few questions." Victor nodded numbly, his eyes fixed on the house as if hoping Samantha would suddenly appear and tell him it was all a nightmare. "Of course, anything. Please." The detective led Victor to the side of the property, away from the noise of the investigation. "You said you were away on business for the past 2 days. Where exactly were you?" "I was in Chicago," Victor replied, his voice flat, drained of emotion. "I had a client meeting that lasted all weekend. You can check with my office. I swear I wasn't here." "We will," Alvarez said, making a note. "When was the last time you spoke to your wife?" "Friday morning before I left for the airport. Everything seemed normal. We talked about Isabel coming over for the weekend. Samantha seemed fine." Alvarez noted the timeline. It aligned with what Isabel had told him earlier. Still, something gnawed at him about Victor's demeanor, but he couldn't pinpoint it just yet. "And how was your marriage, if you don't mind me asking? Any problems lately?" Victor's face tightened at the question. Every couple has their ups and downs. But no, nothing serious. We were doing fine. Alvarez nodded, but the generic response felt rehearsed. "Anyone who might have wanted to hurt Samantha? Any threats, strange behavior, anything unusual?" Victor hesitated, his eyes darting away. "Not that I can think of. No. Everyone loved Samantha." The detective watched Victor's body language closely. There was something off, a subtle tension in his words and the way his gaze avoided direct eye contact. But for now he couldn't push too hard. As Victor gave his account, other officers began canvassing the neighborhood, asking the usual questions about strange noises, unknown visitors, or unusual behavior in the past few days. So far, no one had reported anything out of the ordinary. But just as the investigation seemed to be hitting a lull, a piece of unexpected evidence surfaced. A small note found in Samantha's purse, scribbled in a shaky hand. It read, "I know your secret." The note was brief, but it was enough to jolt the case forward. Someone had threatened Samantha, and now Detective Alvarez had a new lead to pursue. He glanced at Victor, who was still standing by the side of the house, staring blankly at the ground. The note raised questions that needed answers, and those answers could potentially blow the case wide open. Alvarez's instincts were sharp, and they told him this murder wasn't random. There was a secret buried deep in this family, one that someone had been willing to kill for. With the cryptic note discovered in Samantha's purse, Detective Alvarez knew the investigation had taken a critical turn. "I know your secret." The message was chilling, hinting at an affair or a hidden scandal. As the forensics team examined the note for fingerprints or DNA, Alvarez shifted his focus to the potential suspects. The first was obvious, Victor Sandoval. Despite his alibi, Alvarez couldn't shake the feeling that Victor knew more than he was letting on. His emotional reaction at the scene had seemed genuine, but there were cracks, subtle hesitations in his responses. And if the note was any indication, Samantha had been hiding something, possibly from Victor. Could it have been an affair? So, was Victor aware of it? And had it driven him to murder? Alvarez arranged for Victor to come down to the station for further questioning. He wanted to probe deeper into their marriage, the details Victor had glossed over. But before he could call Victor in, something unexpected happened. Isabel Hudson, still grieving her sister's death, came forward with a shocking revelation. "Samantha was having an affair," Isabel said softly, tears in her eyes as she sat across from Detective Alvarez. "She never told me who, but she said it was someone close to the family. Alvarez's heart rate quickened. The affair explained the note, but who was the lover? Could this secret lover be the real killer? And was Victor oblivious or complicit in the crime? Did Samantha mention anything specific about this person? Alvarez asked, leaning forward, sensing they were on the cusp of a breakthrough. Isabel shook her head. No, she was careful not to say too much. But I always had a feeling it was someone we knew well. With this new information, the list of suspects broadened. Alvarez's mind began piecing together potential motives. Samantha's secret lover now became a primary focus. But if it wasn't Victor, who could it be? That's when Isabel's gaze faltered, and she nervously bit her lip before speaking again. There's something else you should know. My mom, she and Victor were always very close. Too close. Alvarez froze. What do you mean by that? Isabel hesitated, her voice trembling. I think my mother's was the one Samantha was talking about. The bombshell accusation sent shockwaves through Alvarez. Samantha's mother? The potential for betrayal ran deeper than he had imagined. A secret affair was almost unthinkable, but could it be true? The bombshell accusation sent shockwaves through Alvarez. Samantha's mother? The potential for betrayal ran deeper than he had imagined. A secret affair between Victor and Marlene was almost unthinkable, but could it be true? Alvarez immediately added Marlene Hudson to the suspect list. If she and Victor had been involved in an affair, and Samantha had discovered it, this could explain the deadly confrontation. The pieces were falling into place, but now Alvarez had to uncover the full truth. Had the affair between Victor and Marlene been Samantha's undoing? Or was there yet another dark secret waiting to be revealed? Detective Alvarez felt the weight of Isabel's revelation heavy on his shoulders. An affair between Victor and Marlene Hudson, Samantha's own mother, seemed too twisted to be real, but it fit. It explained the note found in Samantha's purse and the motive behind the killing. If Samantha had discovered the affair, it could have driven a deadly confrontation. But Alvarez needed more than suspicions, he needed proof. The detective immediately focused his investigation on Marlene Hudson. She had been at the house several times in the past weeks, according to neighbors, and her proximity to Samantha raised further questions. Alvarez arranged for Marlene to come in for questioning. Her calm demeanor when she arrived at the station made Alvarez wary. This was a woman with secrets. Marlene, Alvarez began, can you tell me about your relationship with your daughter and her husband, Victor? Marlene smiled, though it seemed forced. Victor is a good man. I was close to both him and Samantha. We were a tight-knit family. Is that all? Alvarez pressed, watching her closely. Were you and Victor closer than Samantha knew? Marlene's face stiffened, but she quickly regained her composure. I don't know what you mean by that, detective. Alvarez leaned in. We have reason to believe you and Victor were having an affair. We found a note in Samantha's purse that suggests she knew about it. If Samantha found out and confronted you, things could have escalated quickly. For a moment, Marlene's facade cracked, and her expression turned cold. She didn't deny the affair, which confirmed Alvarez's suspicions. It wasn't supposed to be like this, Marlene muttered, her voice breaking. Samantha, she found out. She was furious. I tried to explain, but she wouldn't listen. We argued and things got out of control. Alvarez's heart pounded as Marlene's confession poured out. What happened next, Marlene? Marlene looked down, tears streaming down her face. She attacked me. She said she was going to ruin me, tell everyone what I had done. I panicked. I grabbed something, anything, and hit her. I didn't mean to kill her, but when I saw her lying there, I knew it was over. The gravity of Marlene's words settled over the room. Samantha had discovered the horrifying truth about her mother's betrayal, and in a moment of rage and desperation, Marlene had killed her own daughter to protect her secret. The case had broken wide open. Marlene was arrested on the spot. Her confession sealed the investigation. But even with the truth revealed, the damage done to the Hudson Sandoval family was irreparable. Victor, devastated by the revelation of his affair and the murder of his wife, fell into a deep despair. The once close family was shattered, and Isabel, still reeling from the betrayal of both her mother and brother-in-law, was left to pick up the pieces of a life forever scarred by tragedy. Marlene Hudson's trial captivated the media, as the shocking details of her affair with her son-in-law, Victor Sandoval, and the brutal murder of her daughter, Samantha, unfolded in court. The prosecution painted Marlene as a desperate woman driven by shame and fear, willing to silence her daughter to protect her secret. The defense, however, argued that the crime was a tragic accident, an argument that Marlene herself clung to throughout the trial. In court, Marlene appeared frail and remorseful, repeatedly expressing her sorrow for what she had done. "I never meant to hurt Samantha," she tearfully stated during her testimony. "I loved her, but everything spiraled out of control." Despite her pleas for leniency, the jury was unconvinced. The evidence, combined with Marlene's confession, was overwhelming. After 3 days of deliberation, the jury found Marlene guilty of second-degree murder. The judge sentenced her to 25 years to life in prison, a decision that brought some closure to those who had followed the case. For Victor Sandoval, the verdict marked the end of a nightmare but also the beginning of a lifetime of regret. His affair with Marlene had not only destroyed his marriage but had also led to the death of the woman he claimed to love. Victor's reputation was ruined, and he withdrew from public life, haunted by the guilt of his actions. Sylvia Hudson, the only surviving member of the immediate family, was left devastated. She had lost her sister and her mother in the most horrific way imaginable. In the months that followed, Isabel distanced herself from both her mother and Victor, choosing to focus on rebuilding her life away from the dark cloud of the family's tragedy. Samantha's murder left an indelible mark on the community. What had once seemed like an ordinary family was now a symbol of betrayal and heartbreak. Neighbors who had once admired the Hudsons for their closeness now spoke of them in whispers, as the dark secrets that had torn them apart lingered in the minds of everyone who knew them. Though justice had been served, the scars of this twisted love triangle would never fully heal. Samantha Hudson's death remained a tragic reminder of how love, betrayal, and desperation can collide in the most destructive of ways. In the wake of Marlene Hudson's conviction, the lives of Victor Sandoval and Sylvia Hudson unraveled. Victor, consumed by guilt over his affair with Marlene and the role it played in Samantha's death, withdrew from society. He resigned from his job and moved away, seeking solitude to grapple with the crushing weight of his choices. Despite therapy, he found no peace, his life forever tainted by the betrayal and loss of his wife. Isabel, devastated by the dual loss of her sister and mother, moved away as well, attempting to start anew far from the haunting memories of her family's tragedy. Though she sought closure, the betrayal and violence left her emotionally scarred. The community, once fond of the Hudson-Sandoval family, distanced itself, their story becoming a dark tale of love gone horribly wrong. Even years later, whispers of Samantha's murder lingered, a cautionary tale of secrets and betrayal. Though justice had been served, the emotional fallout endured. For Victor, Isabel, and the town, Samantha's death remained a haunting reminder of how quickly love and trust can turn into unimaginable tragedy.